Welcome to the Lewis and Rozh Hockey Podcast. I'm Lewis,
And I'm Roche.
and today we have a very, very, very special guest, Mr. Kyle Cushman from the Score Esports and Twitter. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, guys. Thanks for the very nice introduction.
You are such a. I love your stuff on Twitter, man. I love
Thank
your
you.
articles. Um, you know, such a. I cannot express my love for your work, Kyle. It is up there. And
I really appreciate that. I'm glad there's other hockey nerds out there that like the stuff that I like.
I think it's fair to say, would it be fair to say that you're probably best known on Twitter for being the prospect guy?
Yeah, specifically the Leafs prospect guy. I'm
Yeah.
like one of like 4 people that tweet about the Newfoundland Growlers. So
They are my favourite ECHL team.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
Their jerseys are so good. I need to get one. But
Yeah, great logo. Yeah, great branding overall.
the shipping to England is pretty expensive, I have to say.
You should have seen this guy. After we lost to Florida, he jumps to Dallas immediately.
And then they lose.
Oh no.
Yeah, like I said, I am a fan of Dallas, separate from the Leafs. I'm a Leafs fan first.
Right.
And
okay.
then I jumped to Dallas because my favourite player is on the Dallas Stars, Mr. Joel Kiviranta.
Okay.
Yeah. And Roche seems to think I'm just a bandwagoning, but they're
I think
currently
you're a
down
little delusional.
3-1. They're 3-1 down to the Vegas Golden Knights at the moment. So take from that what you will.
Yeah, who are you going to jump to next? Vegas?
I don't know. Wherever I jump to seems to lose. So I don't know. Maybe I'll jump to. I kind of want Florida to win if they get to the final. You know.
They're the feel-good story of the year, so
They are. Well, I feel good. They eliminate the Leafs.
maybe not
Depends
for
on your
me.
perspective.
So let's kick off a podcast then with your thoughts on the potential of a Golden Knights Florida Panthers final, because I think it's probably tending towards that. I don't think Dallas are going to win.
It'd certainly be a shock if it wasn't, if it didn't happen
Yeah.
at this point. That sounds like a very, very fun series. We've seen since like kind of the middle part of the second round, there be a little bit of duds in the playoffs right now, especially
Yeah.
with the 2 conference finals going up 3-0 for both. But just the speed that the Panthers have, and just so many different storylines on Vegas, like it just seems like at this point, out of the 4 teams that you had in the finals and all of that taken into account, that seems like a very, very fun final on paper. You'd be having 2 teams going for the first ever cups, as well. 2 teams in non-traditional markets, of course, a very recent expansion team as well. So that sounds like a final that'd be a lot of fun. So given some of the discussion at the beginning of the conference finals where there were some people a little bit upset about the 4 finalists being from non-traditional markets and things like that. In terms of the actual on-ice hockey product, I think it'll be a lot of fun. And then you take into account how good the crowds have been, especially in Vegas and Florida and stuff like that. I think we'd be in for a very, very fun final if it does end up being those 2 teams.
It's nice to see that once Florida actually do well in the playoffs, they have fans. Because I remember in the Leafs
Yeah.
games, like half of their stands were empty, and it was like really, really like sad almost to see like a team doing so well and just having no one supporting them. But I will say, like, let me speak. If the Golden Knights make it to the final, I'm really interested to see how the goaltending holds up, because we've seen in the Western Conference Aiden Hill just being an absolute monster in net, and then in the East you've got Sergei Bobrovsky, who has returned back to his 2013 form. Will they be able to keep their form going into the finals, or will one of them crumble and it just be another sweep?
Yeah, Aiden Hill was one of those guys that before he got the opportunity in the playoffs, I was like, this is going to be an intriguing like free agent to target, just because he had some good numbers in the regular season. He hadn't been a full-time starter. He had some good numbers across a couple of teams in San Jose and Arizona that weren't great, and had some better numbers in Vegas. And then he's gotten this playoff opportunity, and he's made himself at least a couple more $1 million per season. He's been exceptional for
He has
Vegas.
a 970 I saw last night, which was
Like,
inconceivable. Like,
So, and then you look at Bobrovsky on the other side, and he picked a damn good time to decide to be a $10 million goaltender again.
if
So,
only he could do that in the regular season.
well, yeah, apparently it
Well,
doesn't matter if he does it in the regular season.
Well, now he's
Um,
changed his or did he lose a lot of weight, right? So
Yeah.
maybe we'll see it.
Yeah, and so between those two goalies, it's one of those things where over a larger sample, you would probably expect them to regress down, but this is the playoffs we're talking about. This is a month-long couple weeks that you only need to kind of have that hot play, and two goaltenders have absolutely been on it recently in Hill and Bobrovsky. But as it always is with goaltending, it's so hard to predict going into a new series where at the flip of one game or one bounce and all of a sudden things deteriorate. I think we'll have a good series in the finals if it is these two, as it's certainly trending that way. I don't really see it going the quick sweeps or 3-0 series leads and stuff like that. I certainly hope not. I hope we do get a good final. But yeah, when you look at the two goaltenders, it's not like it's two goalies with great regular seasons and great playoffs. Hill was solid, but he was also hurt for a long time. And
Yeah.
he's come in and been fantastic being able to play every other night in the playoffs. Bobrovsky wasn't even the starting goaltender for the Panthers at the beginning of the playoffs to get into the playoffs. It was Alex Lyon that was getting that job. And had it been Bobrovsky starting, Florida's probably not even in the playoffs, let alone in the cup final. So
Yeah.
it's going to be fascinating to see if, like you mentioned, both of these goalies are able to keep up this hot streak or whether they kind of crumble into the cup final when they face some very different competition.
What do you think the final series score is going to be? Who do you think is going to win, and what do you think the score is going to be in terms of the series score?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I've bet against Florida in every series so far, and I've
Yeah,
looked really
same.
stupid for it.
Yeah, I have as
So
well.
I don't know whether I need to change that and then be wrong on Florida for the one series they lose, or if I just need to be stubborn and keep going with it. But I think I will lean the Golden Knights. They just have the longer track record. They have a very deep forward roster that can play in multiple different ways. They have a lot of very strong defensemen as well that I think will be able to handle some of the forecheck and speed that Florida plays with. When you look at the likes of Pietrangelo and Theodore and White Cloud playing on 3 different pairings, those are all guys that could conceivably play at least top 4 minutes and feel very good about that. And then if Aiden Hill continues to play as solid as he has been, that's a very solid goaltending option as well. You just look at Florida, and it feels like at some point the clock is going to strike midnight, right? Like eventually, it feels
Yeah.
like Bobrovsky's not going to be putting up a 970 in every game. Eventually, they're not going to be getting these coin toss games going their way. Eventually, Matthew Tkachuk isn't going to score every overtime or game winning goal. It just feels like eventually that's going to run out, but maybe they're able to ride it for another 4 wins and capture that Stanley Cup. But looking on paper, I do like Vegas on paper a little bit more. I do think it'll be a closer series though, so I'll take Vegas in 6 if it does end up being that Stanley Cup final.
That's one of the things that I think everyone's been saying throughout the entire playoffs. I mean, you look at the first round and you go, Florida's like a wild card team. They didn't even finish in the top 16. They finished 17.
No, exactly.
Calgary finished above them. You go, oh, well, they're not gonna win against Boston. Boston just set a new wins record, and then they beat them in 7.
Yeah.
And they go against the Leafs and goes, well, Leafs just beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round. They go overcome the first. Sure, they won't beat the Leafs, and then they beat the Leafs in 5. And you go, well, the Carolina Hurricanes, they're really, really deep. They're like the favourite to win, and then they sweep the Hurricanes. I think at this point, you can't bet against them. They're going to win the Stanley Cup final. I reckon it goes to 6.
Yeah,
That's my
it's
Yeah,
it's
sorry,
definitely the back and forth of do you keep riding the wave or do you bet against it? And yeah, regardless, it's going to be a fun storyline to watch whether they are able to continue it into this next series.
I will say though, if Dallas managed to reverse sweep the Golden Knights, I'm taking
Oh.
Dallas over Florida.
Yeah, they'll have
Yeah.
all the momentum
Yeah.
if they pull that off.
What do you think of the the dates being moved for the start of the Cup final? Did you see that earlier?
I'm kind of glad. I'm glad we don't have some weird breaks and stuff like that. Ends a little bit earlier as well, which is nice because I don't know if you've seen the end of June into July schedule for
It
the
means
off season,
Leafs
but
can
it's going
find
to
their
be
GM.
well, it's going to be 5 days of pure chaos because you have the draft on 2 days, qualifying offers due the 30th, and then free agency starts July 1st. It's going to be mayhem for those 4 days. So I'm glad that there's at least a little bit of a break between the projected end of the Cup final, even if it did go to 7 games, and the start of like the true off-season dates. Because
Yeah.
especially for what I do for my work and stuff, that's going to be an absolutely chaotic week.
I can't even imagine like if that stayed the same, what it would like being a reporter. I mean, owning a podcast is not really the same as actually writing for a living.
And specifically for what I do the news stuff as well. So it's I haven't done any July 1st stuff yet. The trade deadline is like the closest I've had to that kind of day, and even this year's trade deadline was kind of slow. So I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but we'll certainly find out. That's for damn sure.
I mean, this season's trade deadline, most of the stuff happened a week or two before rather than the actual day. So
Yeah, it was like a solid week where there was like big trades each day. That was nice.
yeah, although the biggest trade of the trade deadline happened on January 30th, but I will not go into a Vancouver rant again. You can go and watch that episode 7. People listening at home.
So it's a long episode.
So I have down written on my topic list. I meant to start the podcast with this, and I said to Rozh that I'm going to start the podcast with this, and then I just completely forgot because I was so excited about Kyle Cushman being on the podcast. So Rozh, on the like YouTube dashboard thing, right?
Right.
There was you can see who's commented on all of your videos, and normally we don't have any comments on the videos apart from like Ainsley or Frankie, right?
I comment on every video.
And you. But earlier on, we got a comment from someone completely new, right? This is on the Mana trade episode part 2 from Andrus Bruyne. Sad face, in quotation marks, Promosm.
Oh man, comment sections are scary.
No, but like that's the only comment on the video. We have no other comments.
Oh man,
It just says Promosm. It doesn't make any sense. Andrus Bruyne, if you're listening, I'd love an explanation. I really would.
Did he misspell like muzzin? Maybe.
I genuinely have not, because when the Barna trade episode part 2, right?
Right.
For Mr. Kyle Cushman, we did a 2-part series where we went through the 31 other teams, and we discussed a trade proposal for Mitch Marner that we would consider. This was before Doomers got fired, by the way. And we went through every team, and we created a trade package that we would trade for Mitch Marner. So that was part 2, so it would have been the second half. So Jake Muzzin wouldn't have been there, and I'm looking through the players that I said. There's not even one that's close. Anyway, sorry, I meant to start off the podcast with that, but I felt like it really needed to be said. Promosm. That's the name of today's episode. Promosm. It's so bizarre.
Google that. I have no clue what language.
Yeah, I tried putting it to translate earlier, and it came back with nothing. So I'm genuine. Like, did this guy have a stroke? I mean, it ended with a second quotation mark. So surely he clearly meant to type that specifically. But
you know it's tough when you put into Google Translate the word that you're trying to translate, and it comes up with English detected. That's never a good sign.
That's never a good sign. Right, on to the next topic. I did have a list of questions for you, Mr. Kyle Cushman, if you would like to answer them at your own discretion. If you feel any of them are too far.
Let's do it.
I mean, like how he asked that last guy about how much debt he was going to be in. I
did say that. I did ask him how much debt he was going to be in from university. Okay. Who is your favourite prospect league-wide?
League-wide, that's a good one. I think my favorite prospect to watch right now is probably Lane Hudson. I always have a soft spot for the kind of smaller, diminutive players that play with speed, play with pace, and have like a ton of skill. I mean, I'm probably the only one in Canada that owns a Dennis Malgin jersey for a reason.
You have a Dennis Malgin jersey?
Oh, you bet I do.
That's my favourite player.
And he got traded 2 weeks later, so that was tough.
I was distraught when he got traded.
I woke up to like 14 different texts, and I was like, "What the hell happened?" I was like, "Did someone die?" And I check, and it's just everybody checking in on me because Morgan got traded. But anyways, yeah, Hudson he's so unique where he's this small defenseman that basically plays like a rover, and he's just demolished competition for the past 3 years. He demolished at the USNTDP. He put up historic numbers on par with some of the best defensemen we've ever seen in college hockey as a freshman, and he's gone to the World Championships this year and put up great numbers there as well. And this is all for a player that less than a year ago was selected at the end of the second round. So in terms of favorite prospects, I love those guys because
Yeah.
they're uncertain when they get to pro. You don't know whether they're going to be top end, Norris caliber, anything like that, or whether they're going to fizzle out and be quadruple A guys. And I love watching those types of players dominate at the junior level, dominate at the college level, and then see what they're able to do in the future. So right now, I'd probably say Hudson is probably my favorite prospect to watch because the top end guys, the Bedards and stuff like that, are the boring answer. Everyone knows about them. It's kind of the second tier of second round prospects and deeper that I'm most interested in.
Yeah.
And Hudson's definitely the one that, as of right now, is kind of skyrocketed into that next level of prospect tier.
I could be completely wrong about this, but I remember reading a story last year during the draft combine, and there was a player who was taking round some doctor's results. That they did some analysis on some of his DNA to prove that just because he was short doesn't mean that he's not going to grow in the future.
Yeah, that was Lane Hudson.
It was Lane Hudson, yeah. So I really like him as well. I think he's going to be a great addition to the Habs. I really wish Kent Hughes was our GM. Now that Dubas has gone.
I wish the Leafs had a GM.
It's gonna be Bergevin, and he's coming for the memes.
No, I keep seeing on Twitter Peter Chiarelli. No,
No,
no.
Content at least.
Yeah, but not for my soul, you know.
The soul's long gone. So
Yeah,
yeah. But Lewis is a recent Leafs fan. He wasn't here for 2004 to 2012. He wasn't there for those years.
I started watching the Leafs in the 2019-20 season. So actually, this season is the first season I've watched that hasn't been affected by some way by COVID.
Wow.
Yeah. So yes, I haven't suffered the same as you have.
No, I'm saying you still have a soul. You still have something there.
Okay, but
your first introduction to the Leafs in the playoffs was the Columbus series.
Yes.
And you're still a Leafs fan?
The Cody Ceci shot really brought me in, you know. It made me want to see what he could do, and then he left. So, what was I to do?
Him.
I should have followed. and then watch fucking Ron Hextall trade a second for Mikael Granlund. This is the worst trade of the deadline by far. I agree with Steve Dangle when he said that he thinks they should have traded for JT Miller.
I mean, just for the content, that would have been great.
It would have been
hilarious.
At least
Granlund's deal is done at the end of next year. JT Miller's a good player, but I have no clue what kind of trade that would have been.
Do you think he gets traded before July 1st? Because that's when his no move kicks in.
I doubt it. I feel like just the way that Vancouver is kind of set up right now, they're kind of committed to the guys they are committed to. If there was going to be a Miller trade, I feel like I don't know, who's trading for JT Miller right now? It just feels.
No.
GM first. I don't know if they're going to have one before July 1st, but
let me rephrase. If Dubas doesn't get fired last week, do you think they still trade Marner?
I think it's a more likely possibility if Dubas is still here. There's so many factors involved, whether who gets the job and what level of autonomy they do have, and who they do like and who they don't like, what contract negotiations are like. I feel like at this point you would have to look at some kind of trade package for any of those players just to kind of see if you can improve your team, change up your cap structure, all those different factors. And I think Marner is the easiest to move of those guys, just from having an extra year on the contract, being a winger, being the guy that probably, in terms of goal scoring, maybe under-delivered a little bit more than the others in the playoffs, all those kind of factors. I feel like he'd be the easiest one to move. But if you got a new guy coming in and they've got 2 weeks to kind of break all of that down and find a trade partner and all of this stuff. It just feels, as each day ticks by, it seems more and more unlikely that one of the core four is going to move, right? Am I
think
alone
so.
on that?
No,
Yeah.
I think you're right, but I think in order for the Leafs to succeed, they need to trade one of the core four, and obviously the obvious one is Tavares, but he has his no move and refuses to waive it. Unless you're Nick Kyprios, who thinks that you could just ask him to.
Yeah, just ask him. Of course,
Just ask
they
him.
have to waive it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, he definitely didn't go out on record and say that he's not waiving his no move.
Like,
Maybe
why would
ask
he?
him nicely.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. Why would he?
Then maybe say, please, John, pretty please, will you waive it?
Maybe whoever's the next GM will go to they'll bring him into a room and say, Mr. Tavares, we'd like you to waive your no move clause, and Tavares will go, not a chance, and he'll say, I have a special guest, and he brings in Nick Kyprios, and Nick Kyprios goes, please waive your no trade clause.
I mean, do you think Chiarelli's going to be that nice? I think he's just going to say,
Don't
waive
say
it.
Chiarelli's name because you're going to speak it into existence. Listen,
It'd
none
be
of the
funny, though.
none of the
Kyprios is
candidates.
according to Friedman. So
Say that again.
if a certain owner or bidder, I should say, buys the Senators, I think it's Steve Apostolopoulos. Apparently, Kyprios has been advising that group, and Friedman mentioned in his latest 32 Thoughts that I think the way that he phrased it is that if Apostolopoulos wins the bidding rights to buy the Senators, Justin Bourne will need a new co-host, is how he said it. So take that for whatever
God.
it's worth. But
You know what? Controversial opinion. If DJ Smith gets fired, I want him as GM. It's not DJ Smith. It's Pierre Dorian. If Pierre Dorian is fired, I want him as GM. That guy is doing work in Ottawa.
Summer Pierre last year.
Yeah, he was cooking. He hasn't quite cooked it yet, but I'm telling you right now, if he doesn't get fired, I reckon the Sens are a playoff team next season. I think the playoffs in the Atlantic are going to be completely different. Completely different.
I'm a little scared. I'll admit that.
I've given up.
There's a lot of good up and coming teams there. When you look at the Sabres being that close, Ottawa being solid, and then adding Chychrun and potentially, well, you would assume having Josh Norris for the full season instead of like 9 games or whatever it was this year. Like, I don't know. There's some intriguing teams there that could definitely shake things up.
What I find incredible about the Sabres is that they managed to do what they did last season, while being under the cap floor. They had to trade for Ben Bishop to be able to stay above that, which I thought was insane. Like, imagine what they can do with a full 80.
Yeah.
I think the cap's going up by $1 million. I heard reported somewhere. Like with a full $83 million roster.
Yeah. It also helps when like 4 of their top 9 are still on entry level contracts and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's helpful. I think Tage Thompson had the highest, the lowest money per point because his contract was like $1.7 million, which is insane.
I think it was less.
Wait, really? Let me
I
just do
think
my
so.
smooth
What was he
scene
at?
transition here to cap friendly.
He was making 1.4 mil. Yeah.
Wow.
What a steal.
What a player.
What a player. Let's move on to one of the other questions I have for you. Who is your breakout Marlies player on the Leafs next season?
Well, I'm not gonna go like a Joseph Woll because I feel like people know he's good.
He's the backup
at this point. I would be stunned if he wasn't the backup at this point. But like, depends what they do down the middle a little bit. But I love the way that Pontus Holmberg plays.
Oh yeah.
He hasn't had the counting stats. Like if you look at his hockey DB or elite prospects, like he hasn't put up big numbers really. He had one kind of near point per game season in Sweden just before coming to North America. And then this year he was like a little over a half point per game with the Marlies. He had a good postseason that was kind of propped up by a hat trick. But every time I've watched him play, he's taking play and putting it in the offensive zone and creating chances. He's not a great finisher, and I think that's one of the things that he needs to work on to really find that next level. But it seems like every shift he's on the ice, he's creating scoring chances, and whether it's getting into the slot himself and getting scoring chances for himself or assisting on those, he plays such a strong game down the middle. I feel like he's going to be a really solid bottom six player for the Leafs at least next season, and into the future as well. He's an RFA. I'm interested to see what kind of deal he gets. I think there's an opportunity to sign him to like a 2 or 3 year contract and get some value there at the end. But yeah, every time I've watched Holmberg, I tracked a handful of Marlies games this year as well. He was always somebody that stood out in transition numbers, somebody that stood out in scoring chance creation. I think he's somebody that will step into the Leafs lineup full time next year, and be a really solid bottom six center, and one of the few centers that they've actually developed in the system in the last handful of years.
He was one of my favorite players during his stint during the regular season last year, and
Mhm.
I was actually surprised when he got sent down because I thought he was playing a lot better than Camp was.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. He's the perfect Camp replacement where they play similar in terms of when Camp is on. He actually has some kind of low key good transition numbers and some of the stuff that Camp Sharon tracked this year. And plays a good defensive style. And I think you've got your in-house replacement for that right now in Pontus Holmberg. So you don't have to spend the $2 million or whatever it would take to bring back David Kampf. You can bring up a guy in Pontus Holmberg who he is an RFA, so we don't know exactly how much his cap hit's going to be next year, but I can't imagine it's going to be a whole ton. And certainly nowhere near what David Kampf will probably get in free agency, even if it is a $900,000, $1 million difference. That's a notable difference for a Leafs team that has typically needed every dollar that they can get going into the season. So yeah, I completely agree. I really like the way Holmberg plays, and I think he's going to be a great fit in the bottom six as a center stepping into the Leafs lineup next year.
My breakout player is Bobby McMahon. I love that guy.
Mm.
I can't believe he only scored 1 goal because he should have had 20. The style he plays, I actually think he could be like a quiet middle six player instead of a bottom six player. If you put him up there with like Nylander and Tavares, I reckon that could be a powerful combo if he actually figures out how to finish.
That's always what it is, right? The if they figure out how to finish.
I feel like he was just a few inches off every shot. Every
Yeah,
single shot, it looked like it was gonna go in. Whereas you look at other players, every single shot looks like it's Cody Cece in Game 4 versus Columbus.
Oh man, I love how that's like an actual reference point, like a missed shot in like not even a notable point of a playoff game, and Leafs fans remember it so much that you can reference it like 3 years later. I love that.
It was his only shot on goal the entire series. It bemuses me how that player was allowed to stay there for so long.
Cody Cece, gotta love it.
Yeah. Him and Hall, how are they something on key?
Oh, don't start me on Hull. Jesus Christ. Infuriating player. He should. There was I told this to. I can't remember if I told this on the last podcast or I told it to Roach. There was a tweet going around last year on a fake account, who pretended to be the Leafs, and it was a Justin Hull has been placed on waivers for the purposes of reassignment for the Newfoundland Growlers. And so many people believed it because this was during a period where he was playing so poorly.
I remember that. Yeah, there was it Damian Cox that picked it up or something like that? Like,
I don't remember that much. I just remember
I don't know.
seeing the tweet and going,
I'm
that's really
blocked by
funny.
Damian Cox, so
You're blocked by Damon Cox. I'm blocked by Adam Wilde.
really, wow.
Yeah. Don't actually know why.
Didn't like your face.
I'm pretty sure it's so. I sent him a message, in 2021, and I said, I'm a big fan of the podcast. He was talking about UK politics, and he got something slightly wrong, and I wanted to correct him because it was quite like it wasn't the fact that he got it wrong, it was the fact that because he got it wrong, it skewed his perspective a little bit.
Mm.
And I was like, fair point, but this is actually what happened. And he blocked me, I think, because I can't send him messages anymore.
Nice.
No, not nice.
I got blocked by Damian Cox because when I was like 14, I said that something he wrote was stupid. So
I mean, if you can't take criticism, you shouldn't be in the job.
Or don't be a dumb 14-year-old. One of the two.
Earlier on, go on.
I was gonna say maybe you should pull a Shirelli and start begging Adam to unblock you on here.
I am not going to do that. If Adam Wild wants to unblock me, if Adam Wild watches this podcast, amazing. If Adam Wild wants to unblock me, it'd be great, because then, I have no idea. Earlier on, we mentioned, Kyle, that we had a Mana trade episode where we listed through some teams, or we listed through all the teams actually, and we proposed some trades for Mitch Mana. Would you like to hear some of them? And you can give us your rating out of 10.
That sounds amazing.
Let me choose
You know,
my most ridiculous
I
one.
had a look at some of these the other day, and the more I listen to myself, the more I think, what were you smoking?
I mean, like some of them were okay.
Oh man.
You'll see every trade Lewis makes, he demands way too much. Everyone I make, apparently I'm too conservative. So.
We found that I was underrating Mana. Sorry, I was overrating Mana, and Roche was underrating Mana. So maybe somewhere in the middle, there is a compromise with some of these teams, and also
Hey, all I need is one GM to overrate him.
yeah, and also because Dubas is gone now, we don't have to specifically look at Chicago, St. Louis, and Columbus as potential trade destinations. We can look across the entire league. So I will start off with my my Columbus trade.
Okay.
So I am trading to Columbus, Mitch Marner. I'm getting back from Columbus Emil Bemstrom, Cole Sillinger, and Patrick Lino.
Interesting. For starters, I love that you have Emil Bemstrom in there, which is just my nerdy niche thing, where it's the least good of the four players, and it's the one that I'm like, ooh, I like him. I'd probably lean no from a Leafs perspective. Patrick Laine and Austin Matthews playing together would be hilarious given their history and everything like that. I just don't think you're getting enough around Laine where he's locked in at a decent number. He's a good goal scorer, all of that. But Cole Sillinger had some sophomore struggles this year. He probably needs some more time in the AHL before he steps into like a full-time top 9 role. Yeah. And Emil Bemstrom is kind of like a fourth line player that I think can put up some good results, but ultimately isn't too much of an impact player. So you're kind of looking at essentially like Laine and a more developed first rounder, and I feel like that isn't quite enough for me from Marner. So I like where you're thinking though. But ultimately, I think I would say no from a Leafs perspective. Okay. And I think Columbus would probably take that deal pretty quickly.
Fuck you, Roche.
Wow, okay. I see how it is.
Roche heard that and said that it was a joke.
Did I?
I'm pretty sure you did.
Look, all of my trade guesses are based off EA NHL 23, okay? If they won't take it there, then I won't do it.
Did you actually run all of your trades through NHL?
No, I don't have time for that.
I was gonna say that's dedication right there. Okay, let's hear one of yours, Roche.
I'm looking through them all now, and I'm like, oh my god, these are all awful.
Do you want to do another one while you find one?
Yeah, well, I'll do another one. I quickly remake one.
Nice.
Okay, so I am trading to the Florida Panthers, Mitch Marner. I'm getting back Radko Gudas and Matthew Tkachuk.
Florida probably laughs at you.
Yeah, probably.
That's pretty jokes. I'm not gonna lie.
Wow.
Just because of what Tkachuk is doing right now.
See, that's vindication right there for me.
Wow. You said it was a good trade.
I did not.
You're having the complete opposite. You're just agreeing with Kyle.
Like,
yeah, I gotta agree with the guess, but you know.
Last summer, I think that's a fascinating trade that I think could work as like a 1-for-1 type swap. Potentially, maybe a little bit more if you're adding from like a Calgary's perspective, just because Marner had that kind of higher or longer pedigree of being that top end player. But yeah, right now, given he's on trajectory to be like a Conn Smythe candidate, back-to-back 100-point seasons, better goal scorer, all of that brings the intangibles of being that playoff performer, grinder type. I can't imagine Florida even entertaining offers for Kachuk at this point.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Right.
But I like swinging for the fences there. Why not?
If you added in one of the Leafs prospects, I'm not thinking Nye's level. I'm thinking like just below. Do you reckon they'd be more inclined to do it? You talk like Marner and Robertson.
I think the Panthers would probably only listen on like 2, maybe 3 players in the league for Kachuk right now.
That's fair enough.
Which might not be like his actual true value in terms of how he is as a player, but in terms of his importance to the team, what he's doing for the team right now, all of that, I don't see like a single scenario where like unless it's like a Matthews with an extension and like crazy trade stuff that they're even entertaining anything for Kachuk.
That's fair enough. That's an understandable opinion. Do you want to go, Roche, or do you want me to do another one?
I'll throw this one out there.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Hit me with it.
God, this is gonna be bad.
Which is the team? What's the team?
It's Boston, because I'm feeling crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Thinking. So I know we have a load of defensemen right now, but hear me out, okay? Monatha Carlo, Grizzlick, DeBrusque. Maybe there's something there.
I like the base of it, but I don't think you're getting enough high-end value there. Where like Carlos solid, Grizzlick solid, DeBrusque is solid, but none of them are kind of like your top of the lineup player, which I feel like you have to get in a Marner trade. But I like the base of it. There's some intriguing pieces there, but ultimately I don't think you're getting enough high-end value from Boston in that kind of trade, especially trading to an in-division rival. Fair
enough. I mean, my thinking is, doesn't matter how good the player is if he can't get it done, right? So So I was trying to focus on, those kind of building blocks to get that. I get what you mean.
Do you want to do one more, Roche, or should I do my Edmonton one and then we can finish on laughing?
I'll give you my Edmonton one because it's funny.
Okay.
Mitch Marner for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, 1-for-1.
Oh my god, no.
Nuge is his favorite player, so take this with like a huge vat of salt.
Absolutely love that. Just from the sheer like, I that would be like a Taylor Hall for Adam Larson 1-for-1 type tweet. I would imagine.
That is worse than Taylor Hall for Adam Larson.
Nuge plays PK.
Yeah.
That's your defense.
Just an absolute power play merchant.
I mean, but he plays PK. To be fair, it's better than my trade from Edmonton.
Okay, let me compare them. I'll tell you which one I like more.
So, from Edmonton, I'm getting Kylie Yamamoto and Leon Draisaitl.
Leon Draisaitl that was on pace to break the playoff scoring record.
Yeah, kind of mid.
I do like how it's like the cap dump involved in the trade.
Yeah.
Of Yamamoto. But yeah, Draisaitl scored 13 goals in the playoffs this year. How many does Mitch Marner have?
Doesn't he still lead in the league in playoff goals this season?
So in 12 playoff games this year, Draisaitl has more playoff goals than Marner does in 50 total playoff games.
Oh, yikes.
Ooh.
Marner has 10 playoff goals and has the most of 3, which he had this year. So...
Can I explain to you my thinking behind it though?
Yeah,
I think my thinking is reasonably sound. Because I looked at the top players on the Oilers, right? And I looked at their defense and I just went, nope, instantly, because their defense sucks.
Yep.
So I looked at their forward core and I'm like, okay, their bottom 6 is pretty mid. They're just carried by their top 6 players. So I'll run you through them. Evander Kane, fuck off, that guy sucks. Zach Hyman, we already had him. We decided to leave him. Let's just leave it there. Also, he's not a worthy tradable asset for Marner. Hyman for Marner, that's not a good trade. Kylie Yamamoto is an interesting piece because he seems to not be able to score but show some like promise. It'd be interesting to see what he does on a different team. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. So then you've got...
What do you mean by that? You have to explain?
Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And if I'm the Oilers, I'm more inclined to trade Draisaitl than McDavid because McDavid's McDavid.
Yeah, I hear you out there. That makes sense. Like of the two packages, I'm obviously taking Draisaitl there, but
Thank you.
I can't imagine
Oh no,
the
it's a
Oilers
stupid trade.
seeing that trade package and being like, you know what, I think we should do this.
It's a horrible trade from both angles, from every angle. But it'd be
It's
funny.
like it's the two ends of the spectrum of the aiming for the top and aiming for the bottom.
Do you hear that, Roche? Mr. Cushman thinks that Ryan Hopkins is a bottom tier player.
You
This
know
is
what? Maybe if
true.
Lewis, maybe if we actually work together, we can make one decent trade.
Hey, maybe we're cooking here.
Draisaitl and Nuge for Mana.
Sounds perfect to me.
Yeah. Okay, another question for you, Mr. Cushman. This is a bit off the wall. What is NASCAR?
It is the dumbest sport on paper, where it's just cars going in circles for like 5 hours, and for some reason I find it entertaining.
Is it more or less interesting than Formula One?
Right now, I think it is far more interesting than F1, just because F1 races are very boring.
Yep, it's
Um,
so the only experience I have of motorsport is F1. I
which
have
makes sense.
yeah, I there isn't really a lot of ways to watch North American motorsports from the UK.
Mhm.
So I can't really give an educated opinion on NASCAR. All I know is that it's just cars going round in a circle. I was wondering if you could I was wondering if there was actually more to it, but from your description, it sounds
Yeah,
like
well,
there isn't.
that was me kind of joking around with it, but no, it's
Okay.
motorsports is interesting because F1 is the pinnacle, but it's also one of the most lackluster like on track products, just because you only have 20 cars. You have such a big gap between the haves and have nots. So going into a race weekend, you kind of already know who's going to win, unless it's kind of a great season, which we kind of have like once every like 10 years, it seems like. And
Yeah.
even when it's a great season, there's like 3 drivers that can win instead of like two.
Yeah.
And the difference with NASCAR is that it has much less desirability from the off-track perspective. Like, it's not the glitz and glamour of Formula One. It doesn't have that kind of star power that brings so many people into Formula One. But the actual on-track product, most of the times, blows F1 out of the water. There's a lot more action. There's legitimately 15 to 20 different cars that can win every single weekend. One of the factors that kind of makes it annoying is that it is so much longer. Like, most NASCAR races are roughly like 1.5 to 2 times longer than an F1 race,
Oh wow.
which kind of dates back to like the more marathon-esque factors of NASCAR being a test of man and machine, whereas
Yeah.
now it's kind of just a test of neither, because it's comfortable to drive in for the most part and the cars never break down. But there's so many different types of racing in NASCAR. They race on dirt, they race on street courses, they race on road courses, they race on multiple different lengths of ovals. And it's a tough sport to get into, just because the barrier for entry is so big. Like, if you don't grow up around racing, if you don't know racing very well, you don't know cars, you don't know motorsports and stuff like that, it's tough to like really get into, because a lot of the stuff that you're watching for usually is kind of some of the more detailed aspects of it, and
Yeah.
understanding how difficult it is, and things like that. But it's something that I grew up with. Motorsports specifically was actually one of the first things that I loved growing up, over hockey, and kind of switched in as I got into like my early like tens and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a sport that I like to describe as just like, give it a shot. It's tough to get into. I'll never fault anybody for not liking NASCAR and a lot of different stuff, just because there is such a I don't know if stigma is the right word, but there's such a perception of like what a NASCAR fan is and what NASCAR as racing is. But yeah, from an actual entertainment perspective, I think it's one of the better things in motorsports right now. Well, my number one in motorsports right now is IndyCar, which is kind of the fusion of NASCAR and in Formula One aspects. But yeah, it's definitely a very North American and specifically American sport. So it's I never fault anybody for either not knowing anything about NASCAR or being like, yeah, this isn't for me.
is IndyCar the one that Roman Grosjean races in?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. I've seen like clips from those sort of races on Twitter, and they look pretty cool. It looks like it could be more interesting than this F1 season, because this F1 season sucks.
Yeah. And F1 at its best is one of the best things in motorsports. It's just so often it's, oh, Red Bull won again, oh, Mercedes won again, all that kind of stuff.
Mercedes
You
have
get
not won in
the odd
years. I'll
great,
have
yeah.
you know, Kyle. As a
Well,
Mercedes
I am
fan,
well aware. But yeah, I don't know. It seems like every like decade there's like one good season. So
yeah. Actually I should correct myself. I'm not a Mercedes fan. I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan. That guy is
oh, okay, there you
rocks.
go. So you're a Ferrari fan next year, whatever the rumors are.
That is hilarious. I heard those rumors circulating. I actually think it was our friends at STPN who had the who broke the news on that with their
It's not
F1
like our
podcast.
enemies, man. One of them has you blocked.
That's true. I am enemies with a third of the STPN owners. I need to find a way to mend that relationship. Although I like, it's very difficult from our perspective to be able to like do that. So I emailed the hockey guy the other day.
Oh yeah.
I asked him if he wanted to come on the podcast, and he just blanks me. He hasn't
He's a
emailed me back
busy
at all.
guy, you know. He's watching hockey all day.
I imagine his like emails are filled with sponsors, like sponsor
Yeah,
proposals.
it's tough to kind of reach out to people with that kind of platform.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe at some point, if we grow a bit bigger, we'll be able to contact Adam Wild, and I can.
Hey, the worst people can say is no, right? Or not even acknowledge it. So
Yeah.
They
you
could
never know
laugh.
unless you try.
I think laughing is saying worse than no.
Yeah, but
And they
you can't really laugh over like email, can you?
I mean,
Unless
could
you
just
just get like a bunch of ha ha ha's.
Just send a
It's
blank
just subject.
email, blank email with a voice clip
It's hard to
inside.
reply now.
Like at that point, I wouldn't even be upset. I'd be like, you know what? That's
Yeah,
kind of
that's-
hilarious.
That's fair enough. Like I wouldn't blame him. Earlier on we talked about the GM search for the Leafs. There's obviously the rumours of Peter Chiarelli, Brad Treliving. Please no to both of them. Who do you think is actually going to be the GM of the Leafs?
It feels like it's Treliving's job to lose, right? Like, I think part of the difficulty with kind of gauging who's the most likely here is that we've really only heard like two names. Like, it's
Yeah.
been Brad Treliving for like the past week, and then there's like been a couple of like other veteran GMs sprinkled in there. We've heard nothing of any actual interviews being done besides maybe Treliving either having done an interview or going to do an interview. There's been a lot of, I think, might be in the discussion, but there's been no like concrete like these are the people they've talked to or these are the people on the short list like we've seen with Pittsburgh and who's been on their short list and who's still in the running and all that kind of stuff. So right now, just given the information we have, it seems like Brad Treliving is the guy. And if they do want a GM that has experience and all those different factors, you've kind of got a very short list to go with. And Treliving is one of the better options there. I don't love his track record. I think some of the things like his drafting record is kind of overplayed. You're looking back 8-9 drafts now to like his past like legitimately good drafts and particularly I look outside of the first round for those kind of things because you're expected to hit on your first round picks, and I think the GMs that are able to find talent outside of the first round are the ones that really make the difference in their drafting history.
Like Kyle Dubas. Oh god.
Yeah, well, and it seems like you're kind of starting to get some of those Dubas picks coming through, like Nyes was playing in the playoffs and things like that. But you've got a lot of Marlies now that are Dubas draft picks, especially going into next season. And you're looking at like a 5-year window with Dubas as the general manager, and there just aren't a lot of prospects outside of the first round that make the league that quickly. You're looking at the next couple of years where even the 2018, 2019 draft picks are starting to come through into the league. And you look at Treliving, and yeah, he had great drafts in 2015, great draft in 2016, but since then there's really not been much outside of the first round where the Flames have gotten good prospects coming through the system. They've got a couple decent guys from a couple recent drafts here, but you also look at like the 2021 draft and next week on June 1st is the deadline to sign players drafted from the CHL from that 2021 draft, and it looks like 4 different prospects aren't going to be signed by the Flames, and 2 of those were top 100 guys, which just frankly you can't have happen when you're a capped out team, when you need those ELC guys coming through. And you look for comparison at the Leafs 2021 draft, and all 3 of them have signed contracts. Matt Nyes was playing in the playoffs as a guy drafted in the back half of the second round, who was drafted after the Flames' 45th overall pick of William Stromgren, stuff like that. So I do like Tree Living in terms of being aggressive. I think that is an element that the Leafs do need. They need a GM to come in and make some big decisions quickly. And rightly or wrongly, we've seen big moves made where he decided to keep Johnny Gaudreau up until the deadline, past the deadline, and ultimately left. That was a big decision and a big gamble that ultimately they ended up losing. He got a big package back for Matthew Tkachuk when it seemed like they weren't going to be able to get a big package back. We'll see what those contracts end up aging like. It doesn't look great for Huberdeau. I would expect him to bounce back, but even if he gets back to his top end form, $10.5 million is a bit on the richer side for him. Weegar, on the other hand, looks like a great contract, and we'll see what happens with the draft pick and everything that they got in that trade. You look back previously, they were a team that were supposed to get Nazem Kadri from the Leafs for TJ Brody at the time, and that deal was nixed by Nazem Kadri, and he ended up going to Colorado, obviously, for Tyson Barrie, and a deal that didn't really play out well for the Leafs. So Treliving is a guy that has had aggressive moves. He's also made some bad free agent signings and overpaid certain players. All GMs have bad moves on their roster. I think Treliving, if they go with this specific outline for their next GM, you could definitely do worse than him. I just don't see how it's an upgrade over Kyle Dubas, and I'd be more interested in a new GM stepping in as a first-time GM and seeing what they could do and the upside of that versus somebody like a Treliving where you kind of know what you're getting and it's kind of middle of the road.
See, I'd love to see someone like Brandon Pridham or Eric Tulsky take the reins in the Leafs, but I think it is going to end up being someone dinosaur-ish, and we're all gonna suffer. I do want to pick out 2 things with what you just said though. The first is with Dubas's track record in drafting. I really like his KHL picks, especially with Slava Peksa. I think I can't. I'm gonna butcher his name. Artur Akhtimov, is that his name?
Yep.
And who was the other guy?
The most recent one?
Nikita Grebyonkin. That was the other guy.
Yeah.
Like insanely good picks from really deep in the draft, and you look at Treliving's picks and you go, "Oh, that guy just have no one." Like Dustin Wolf is like the only guy, but even in his debut, it was like, eh. And also, like with Treliving's track record as drafting, that being the thing that most people focus on, you have to look at the players he signed. Huberdeau for $10.5 million is a horrendously bad contract, and I know you said like if he returns to his previous form. For starters, I think that's a huge if. I don't think he does. Also, that guy is like over 30. He signs till he's 38. That is a terrible, terrible contract. And can you imagine him doing that with like Mark Giordano signing him for another like 8-year extension?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, especially like factoring in last summer the trade and kind of how cornered in they were to kind of bring in somebody like Huberdeau, but also then retain him. I understand why they made that signing and hoping that they could slot him in and be a similar player to Gaudreau and all that stuff. But yeah, ultimately it couldn't have gone worse in year one. And I'm fascinated. I hope that Craig Conroy ends up promoting Mitch Love because I really like what he's done with the Wranglers there in the AHL. As
the Wranglers are really good.
As back-to-back AHL Coach of the Year and kind of giving the opportunity to some younger players. I think Huberdeau could bounce back, definitely. But yeah, it's one of those contracts that you probably regret at the time, but is one that you kind of feel forced into. Hopefully that's a deal that you kind of look back at and learn from rather than kind of doing the same stuff going forward. But that is one of the elements of getting a GM with experience, that they've made some of those mistakes with former teams and hopefully they've learned from going to a new team versus a new GM that sometimes has to make their own mistakes. That might be a factor involved for Shanahan making his decision here, but yeah, I think you can do a lot worse than True Living, but ultimately it's one of those moves where it's like change for the sake of change. Like, is that really an upgrade over Kyle Dubas? I certainly don't think so.
I don't think there is. I think perhaps the only better candidate than Dubas out there is Eric Tolsky. You could make an argument for Pridham, but I even then, like Tolsky's got a proven track record, whereas Pridham doesn't.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to focus in on your Uyghur point. I have to completely disagree with you.
Okay, that's fair.
Um,
That's completely fair.
I think that the trade involving him last summer, everyone looked very favourably upon it, especially because of what he did in Florida. But you look at what he did in the Flames this year, and there were some bright spots. But I think overall he didn't have as much impact as I think that they were expecting him to. And I think that his contract extension, which is 6.5 by 8, which is what they're predicting him to do, considering what he's shown this season, you can't sign that contract. I can understand it from the perspective of last season when they signed it, but you look at it this season, you go, man, like as a short-term deal, like a 3-4 year deal, you can sort of understand 6.5 million, but for 8 years, that guy's also over 30. Man,
Yeah, and that's a completely fair point to make. I think for me, I look at what Uyghur did in Florida, and I really like what he did those last 2 seasons, and especially some of the results he had away from Aaron Ekblad when Ekblad was injured. And I look at this season, and given all the disappointment that happened with the Flames this year, Uyghur still had a solid season overall. And I look what he's done at the World Championships with Canada. And I think that there's a very, very good player still to be had there, depending on what systems and what kind of coach steps into the team next year. Because on paper, the Flames should have one of the best, if not the best, defense group in the NHL when you look at the likes of Tanev, Anderson, Hanifin, and Uyghur all there. Zadorov as a bottom of the lineup guy who's put up good results. I think there's a lot of potential there to have a legitimately great defense group there. And I think a 6 million cap hit is more than reasonable for what Uyghur has done in the recent past, and going forward in a couple of years when the cap finally does rise, I think you'll be looking at a number that is going to be very solid value for somebody that is probably going to be playing either top pair or at the very least top 4 minutes for the Flames. But I can absolutely understand that the perspective of a player that had a somewhat disappointing season, signed 8 years, is going to turn 30 in the middle of the next season, all this stuff. Like, I can definitely see where that deal also doesn't age very well.
I also completely understand your point. I also think that they shouldn't have traded Kachuk to Florida for the package they got back. I think if you look at some of the other teams that he could have been traded to, there were some much better players available.
Yeah, it also depends on what kind of offers you were getting, and if you were kind of shoehorned into a couple of teams. It's tough to know the behind the scenes of that and what
Yeah,
offers were on the table. Um, but taking into account that Kachuk was forcing a trade to not very many locations, you got a lot of high end potential back, which I don't think a lot of people expected at the time. It just, I don't know, the Flames this year, everything kind of went wrong in terms of losing so many 1 goal games, losing so many tight games where they couldn't score in the third. And I think that's a team that has a lot of potential to bounce back and a lot of players to bounce back with a coach that isn't as hard-assed as Daryl Sutter is.
let's not forget that the reason the Flames didn't make the playoffs this year, and the reason not the Panthers are in the East Conference either, that wouldn't make any difference. The reason the Flames lost this year is because of Nick Ritchie. So, and you may have seen in the one of the chats on the server, Roche put a copy pasta of Nick Ritchie, which I'd never seen before until a couple of days ago. It made me chuckle quite hard.
Don't know how you've never seen it. It's a
I
good one.
Nick Ritchie, man, what a player!
What a
Toronto
dynamic
Marlies legend.
Toronto
Leafs
Marlies.
legend.
Talking of the Marlies, I had another question for you that I thought of while you were talking about the Flames. What do you think of Mac Hollowell? Because I have seen a lot of people on Twitter completely slate him. But he seemed alright when he played with the Leafs earlier on this year.
I think Mac Hollowell is a very specific player in terms of being good at kind of what he is at the AHL level, and I just don't think it's like high enough skill to do that game at the NHL level. Like he had some decent moments in his NHL stint. He made some good passes. He made a couple of decent breakout passes, but um, I think you just need a little bit more from a bottom pairing guy. He's not gonna quarterback a power play at the NHL level.
Yeah.
Maybe like a second unit, but he's not going to be like a third pair guy who then jumps up on the top pairing, top unit power play like an Eric Gustafsson can. And I don't think he has quite enough size to properly defend the rush and be a decent enough in zone defender. So he's fine for what he is. He's a top 4 AHL defenseman who does some good things offensively and gives up a lot defensively. I didn't really like how the Marlies used him in the playoffs, having Matteo Petronero with him, but that's a bit of a different conversation. Yeah, Mac Hollowell is a perfectly fine player. He can be a guy that plays like a game or two for you in a pinch, but I would imagine his time in the organization's coming to an end here. They've got a lot of defense prospects coming through, a lot of guys with the Growlers that could use some minutes, and I don't really see a full-time NHL future here for Hollowell as much of a kind of locker room favorite that he seems to be.
How do you see the Marlies defense next season? Because I remember back in, I think it was March or April, I can't remember if it was one of your tweets or someone else's, but they had 9 defensemen on the active Marlies roster.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked through some of the names and I'm like, all of these are really solid players, especially Noel Hoffenmeyer, one of my favourite
Mm-hmm.
AHL defensemen last season. Do you see some of their more veteran Marlies defensemen like leaving and going somewhere else so they can bring in younger players, or do you see it more staying as it is? Because I think a lot of the reasons there was, let me phrase this properly. The way the defensemen were deployed last season under Greg Moore was terrible.
I wouldn't say it quite as harshly, but I agree with that statement for the most part. Um, they've got 7 free agents right now on the Marlies defense. Jordy Ben, Carl Dahlstrom, Matteo Petronero, Marshall Rafai, Noel Hoffmeyer are all unrestricted free agents, and then Matt Hollowell and Philip Kral are restricted free agents that, given how this season went, probably don't get qualified.
Okay.
But we'll see how that kind of plays out. Um, and really, a lot of that depends on how many of those guys come back. You've also got Matt Hellickson and Tommy Miller that played quite a few games for the Marlies this season that are free agents. Right now, they've got 6 guys kind of ready to go for the AHL if Kral and Hollowell come back, which maybe one of the two does, but I'd bring back Philip Kral, but he also didn't play in the postseason for some reason, so I can't imagine he's back. And they've got kind of a lot of similar players that are younger stepping into the Marlies as Mac Hollowell is, so I would like to free up some of those minutes. But you've got Topi Niemela that's going to be a top pairing guy that he was in the playoffs already, and he's going to be the main stalwart. You've got William Villeneuve, who I actually really liked his progression this season.
Yeah.
And he should be at least a lineup regular, if not a top 4 regular.
Memorial Cup champion. William
Yeah,
Villeneuve.
exactly. Last year with the host St. John Sea Dogs. And then it gets a lot more wide open, where Mikko Kokkonen had a bit of a disappointing season, but he's played great in the Kelly Cup playoffs. He could jump up to a full-time role, which I would expect him to at least rotate in the lineup more regularly. The only defenseman currently signed to an AHL contract for next year, Johnny Tyconic, has been great with the Growlers in the playoffs. He leads, or at least he did lead, the ECHL in assists. I think he still does, but I haven't checked the last couple of games.
Yeah.
He's been dynamite on the power play there. He's somebody that could step into a role as well, who is somebody that was a pretty high pick as well with the Senators a few years ago. He was a second rounder back in the day. And then past that, it all depends on who comes back. Does Marshall Rafai come back? I would like to see him brought back. He's somebody that would be in that top 6. Do they bring back 1 or 2 veterans? Do they bring back a Jordy Ben, Carl Dahlstrom? Do they look elsewhere? What happens with the status of Victor Mete and whether he comes back? There's a lot of different factors at play there. But yeah, the Marlies had a lot of injuries on defense this year. They had a lot of different looks. There was a lot of players that didn't expect to be regulars that ended up being regulars. And then I don't really love how they were utilized in the playoffs. But going into next season, you've got 3 pieces probably for sure on the roster, and then a whole lot of question marks around that depending on who is brought into this team.
I have a couple more questions about the Marlies, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
When I look at the Marlies core that are signed to two-way contracts, I look through them and I go, some of these players have been in the Leafs organization for quite a few years now. Is it time to set them free, let them go into the sunset? The players like SDA, let me make sure I'm getting the other names right because I don't want to be dubbed a fool. Your SDAs, your that's it really. Oh, Dmitry Ovchinnikov. That was another guy.
Yeah, for SDA, he's such a fascinating player. I could see him not being qualified this summer. I could see him signing like a 2-3 year contract and seeing if he kind of develops into something. Has so much skill on the puck, and started the season so well as well, and kind of faltered as the season went along. He requires waivers. I can't imagine somebody would claim him yet.
Yeah.
But he's such an interesting project that I hope he stays. I don't think it's a bad thing to have continuity with your minor league teams. It's what I like, what they've done with the Growlers in terms of having somebody like Zach O'Brien constantly being with the team, and even some depth players like James Melindy and Darian Plouffe and some of those guys that are always kind of there for the Growlers. That's not something that a lot of minor league teams have. And so having some of those veteran core pieces is a real benefit, I think. And having somebody like an SDA who is somebody that has kind of been through the development program and is still developing in his kind of early to mid 20s, I think there's value there. So I'd like to see him brought back. I could see him being let go to free up kind of some contract slots and free up some minutes with the Marlies with kind of a new influx of players being brought in. And somebody like Dmitry Ovchinnikov, I think is a different kind of intriguing piece where I think he could be a very fun bottom of the lineup player in the future. But I want to see what he does over a full season in North America before I kind of make any judgments on whether they should let him go or not.
I think it's hard to make a judgment on him because when he was in the KHL, I think he was playing under 10 minutes a night.
Yeah.
In I can't remember which team he was on, but
CBR.
That's it. Like I think it's hilarious how the KHL teams manage their players, especially their young players.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh. Talking about things that make me laugh, how much did you laugh when Pavel Gogolev went back to the Growlers after being traded to Chicago? Because I laughed very, very hard.
So I don't remember. I think it might have been somebody sent me a DM saying like, go look at like Pavel Gogolev's Instagram, and I was like, oh, that's a very random thing for somebody to say. Okay, and this was before he had even been like released from a contract with the Blackhawks, and it was like an Instagram story of him celebrating in a Growlers uniform, and it was like soon or something like that, and I was like. What is like initially I thought like the Blackhawks were going to loan him to the Growlers and they would keep him for another season under the contract and stuff, and then the next day he was on unconditional waivers, and I was like, are the Leafs about to sign this guy back? And of course by the end of the week he was back on an AHL contract, and I think that says a lot about the Leafs organization and specifically what they're doing at the ECHL level, where a player like Gogolev is willing to give up an extra year on an NHL contract to go back to that program and kind of finish out what he started there. Especially for a player that was trending so well early in his AHL tenure and it had kind of fallen off over the coming season.
Yeah.
I think that says a lot about the player as well to finish what he started and the organization and what they've done. And he's been great for the team as an offensive piece. He has obvious issues in terms of defense and not the best skater and some of those things, but he's great at the whole offensive thing, and he's been a very fun player with the Growlers this year. I doubt he sticks around past the season. He probably moves on to different opportunities in an organization where he hasn't kind of been demoted from the AHL, whether that's going back to Europe, whether that's finding a different organization to play in here in North America remains to be seen. But yeah, that was a a very funny twist to the whole Pavel Gogolev situation, where he played 2 games with Rockford, like he was
Wait,
legitimately
he
playing
did?
there. Yeah,
I
yeah, he
didn't know
scored a goal.
that. Oh
Yeah,
wow! I thought he instantly went and said, "No, I'm not playing for you guys," and just left.
yeah,
Obviously, he had to get put on waivers, but
he reported to the team. He played 2 games. He scored a goal with Rockford. And then like a couple days later, he was on unconditional waivers and back with the Growlers. So,
that's hilarious. That's
yeah.
really. I remember laughing very hard, but it's even more funny that he actually played with Chicago and then left.
Yeah, I saw I that whole situation was like, is this really happening? Like, yeah, that was pretty funny.
Earlier on, you mentioned Topi Niemela, and
Mm.
I have
Oh
noticed
boy, oh boy, oh boy.
that my co-host Roche has not been talking a lot. I think it's probably a mixture of him being tired and also having been quiet because he's in his kitchen. Do you want to just spend like a couple of minutes talking to Roche about Topi Niemela, because Topi Niemela is Roche's favourite Leafs
Yeah, I've
player.
been on this guy since the draft. Okay.
Love that. Topi Niemela is such an interesting case study of like how a prospect develops, where on draft day, he was somebody that was kind of like a fringe first round prospect. I remember him being kind of ranked in that like late first, early second round range. Ended up falling to the Leafs at the beginning of the third round. And on draft day, like the mantra that was given about him was being this kind of like modern age defensive defenseman, where he's good in his own zone, is good transporting the puck, but might not put up the great offensive totals. And 2 years later, he's setting U20 scoring records for a Finnish defenseman in Liga, and adding so much of that kind of like blossoming offensive game to his style. Where yeah, he's given up a little bit of the defensive stuff in kind of developing like that. But he's a player that is so good in transition, breaking out the puck, finding different lanes, being willing to jump up into the rush is one of those things that has kind of unlocked that higher end offensive potential for him. And that's exactly what plays into the style that the Marlies play and what the Leafs play, where they want players, defensemen, to jump into the rush, be active in the play, whether that's in transition and trying to create a numbers advantage, or in zone and rotating with forwards and having forwards come up to the point, defensemen cutting down low, looking for different lanes. That's exactly what Topi Niemela has added to his game over the past couple of years, and what's put him kind of in this radar as a potential top 4 defenseman in the future. He's gone from a player that in 2020 in his draft year was a low scoring kind of bottom of the lineup player in the top league in Liga, and has blossomed over these handful of years to be a player with some legitimately intriguing offensive potential. I don't know if he's going to be like a power play quarterback in the NHL like he's currently doing with the Marlies and did a little bit in Finland. He might do it on like a second power play unit. I don't think he'll be a top unit guy. But he provides that kind of 5-on-5 intriguing value in the offensive zone, and still has some of that really strong breakout ability in transition. So even in the quote unquote down year that he had, at least statistically in Finland, he's still pretty firmly the number 2 prospect in the system for me, behind Matt Nyes, if you still consider Nyes in the system. In terms of the prospect pool, whether he's graduated or not. I know a lot of people are kind of picky about who's considered a prospect and who isn't. But yeah, I absolutely love the way Topi Niemela plays, and I'm absolutely on board to talk about him anytime I can.
Yeah, no. When I watched him in the World Juniors a couple of years back, he was so
Yeah,
dominant.
yeah. He
Wow.
what it was the 2021 tournament that he won, top defenseman, I think it was, and then
Yeah,
came
I think
back
so.
last year. Yeah, like
Yeah.
That combination
And
of
then
him
great
and
player.
Hervonen in that
Yeah,
World Juniors.
yeah.
and then when McTavish like knocked his shot out midair,
Yeah, that's right.
I
He would have
couldn't
had
believe it.
the gold medal winning goal. Yeah. But yeah, like Niemela played 6 regular season games in the AHL, was kind of thrust into that situation, and in the playoffs he was tied for the team lead in defensive scoring with Matt Hollowell, and he had 2 goals and a couple big goals as well. He was a +4, and you look at Matt Hollowell for comparison, he was a -9. Like plus
No,
minus is a very flawed stat, but a
I
15 goal difference in 7 games kind of tells you a lot. So
-9. Jesus.
Playing with Matteo Petronero will do that, but that's a different story.
Is Petronero bad? Because he has
He's
a
not good.
sick name. He has a really cool name.
His brother plays for the Italian national team.
Is he Italian?
He's American, but is eligible to play for Italy if you spend enough time there. So
See, I think that he should be kept in the system purely because his name's really cool, and you could sell loads of jerseys.
I also think like he's a good player to have in the organization, like from an ECHL perspective. He's a player that has history with the general manager Ryan Hardy. He's a player that he really respects in terms of the work ethic, but I just don't think he's an AHL caliber player, and I was frankly stunned to see him in the playoff lineup over some pretty obviously better players. So we'll see how that plays out, whether he's brought back and stuff like that, if he plays a regular role with the Marlies next year. But yeah, I was very surprised to see Petronero in the playoff lineup over like Philip Krall, Moshe Rufai at some points, Noel Hoffenmeyer at some points. Yeah, that was one that surprised me quite a bit.
But that's because, as we all know, Greg Moore's a fucking idiot. That's not slander, it's true. I don't
Well,
have
I
to
mean,
cover
that's-
myself.
that's what-
Should I cover myself legally anyway?
I
Roche?
think so. Yeah, you probably should. I really don't want this podcast to get taken down this soon.
Okay, allegedly, he's a fucking idiot.
I don't know what to think of Greg Moore. There were some highlights, but there were some weird choices as well. I really don't have a good feel for his tenure.
I keep seeing, or I kept seeing before he got fired, Mark UK Leaf on Twitter. Every single time there was a Marlies game, there was some disparaging comment about Greg Moore. It was quite
Yeah.
funny.
There were not many Marlies fans that really liked Greg Moore. But what I will say in defense of Greg Moore is he steps into the situation in a really rough time. He didn't have like a full season until like this year, or sorry, he didn't have a full season with the Marlies, like a full training camp, a regular season, playoffs, all of that stuff until last season. This year, the team made some improvements, but especially down the stretch, were not good. They got through their first round series, but then were pretty significantly outplayed by Rochester. So I think the decision to move on from him is the right one. He's a young coach. I think he's got some intriguing qualities to him in terms of the way that he thinks about the game. But
Yeah.
It was certainly a downgrade going from Keefe to him, and it was a tough way to kind of step in mid-season and all these different things for Greg Moore. But yeah, the way that the season ended, I think made it pretty clear that the Marlies should make some changes, and I'm glad that they did. I'm very interested to see what they end up doing at the HL level into the future. But obviously, from a Leafs front office and coaching perspective, that's probably like 8th on the short list. So.
Do you think that Keith gets demoted back to the AHL? Because I actually don't think he stays as the Leafs coach. Whether that's a mid-season firing or straight away as soon as the new GM comes in, the decisions he made in the playoffs, it's enough for me to go, maybe someone else.
Yeah, I think the Leafs would be good to have somebody else step in to that role, and they probably will. It's not exactly common for a GM to step in and have a Keefe or have a coach in the situation that Keefe is and kind of keep them along. But I would be surprised if another NHL team didn't bring Keefe along. There's not many coaches you look at with this kind of track record of success in the regular season as Keefe, and there's a lot of teams that could do well to bring him in, and maybe he's learned some things over this Leafs tenure that he can bring to a different organization. But I think Sheldon Keefe is definitely an NHL caliber coach. I just don't know if he's still the right guy for the Leafs.
Do you think he goes to Pittsburgh when Dubas signs in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, that was the exact same question I was going to ask.
you asked the question, Rose, because it gets you more time
No,
to speak.
you already asked it. It's too late now.
Okay.
I would. Dubas is a great hire for Pittsburgh, but if he decided to fire Mike Sullivan to bring in his guys, then the Leafs made the right decision moving on from him. You can't be that tied to quote unquote your guys to fire an objectively top 5 coach in the NHL and Mike Sullivan, who has consistently done great things with Pittsburgh and consistently gotten more out of that roster. than he probably should have when you look at the amount of injuries that they've had and still being a perennial playoff team. They haven't done much in the playoffs, but I think that's more on the roster that they've had than the coaching decisions. But yeah, I would it would be very funny if that happened, but man, I can't like Mike Sullivan is the guy in Pittsburgh. Like I don't know if you guys read that Athletic article about kind of
do
the
what?
final days of Hextall,
I
but like it's
saw
clearly
snippets of it. It's bad.
that Sullivan is the guy, and kind of the general manager there was kind of secondary. So I don't know if that changes with whoever's brought in with management, but it seems like the players love Mike Sullivan. He's had good results, and I think that he could do some good things again when he doesn't have a GM like Ron Hextall kind of making the roster decisions for him.
See, I think from an internal perspective, that makes a lot of sense, keeping him as the coach. But from an external perspective, I really don't think he's a great coach anymore. And not just because of his lack of playoff success and the fact that they didn't actually make it to the playoffs this season, but if you look at the other coaches around the league, man, he's got I have to disagree with you when you say he's a top 5 coach, because I look at other coaches and they're ranked so much higher than him. Don Granato, that's a guy I like.
Yeah, he like there's a lot of different ways that you can look at that. Like somebody like Don Granato, I wouldn't put up in that discussion yet, but he's got a young roster and he might kind of step into that kind of echelon for me in the coming years. But when I look at what Sullivan has done, he won the back-to-back cups, but then since then he's had some significant injury issues at times with the Penguins, and like not just small injuries, like we're talking about like Malkin missing significant time, Crosby missing time, Chris Letang having some significant health issues as well. The goaltending being the situation that it is, and having a roster where you've got a couple of intriguing guys around the core pieces there, but they've not really had a great bottom six or depth pieces for a handful of years. Like bringing in Mikael Granlund, like we mentioned earlier, bringing in somebody like Jeff Carter. This is a team that does not have a lot of those kind of young up and coming pieces on the roster, and still getting pretty good results out of it from most of the season.
I don't
or
know
most
what
of
you
the
mean.
past
The
few
fact that you are
seasons. But
slandering Dmitry Kulikov right now is upsetting me.
I think Kulikov was good a couple years ago. So.
Oh.
Which seems like it's the mantra for Ron Hextall, getting people that were good years ago. But.
Did you see the quote? I think it was from the Athletic article. The quote saying that Jeff Carter was supposed to be the 2C to replace Malkin. Like, come on, man! If Ron Hextall gets another job,
I have a soft spot for Jeff Carter because he played for my hometown junior C team. I think this technically the term for it, the Strathroy Rockets, when he was 15 years old before he went to the OHL. I have a Strathroy Rockets jersey with Carter on the back of it, but you have to be clinically insane to replace Evgeny Malkin with Jeff Carter at this point.
like I like Jeff Carter as a player, not of that cap hit, not as a 2C.
I don't even know if I like Jeff Carter as a player anymore, to be honest. But
that's fair. Isn't he like 38? He's really old.
He's old.
Like he's not a good like 4th line center replacement. Never mind a 2nd line center replacement. Oh god, I can't wait to see Jeff Carter take over. Not Jeff Carter, Ron Hextall take over in a big market, like the Leafs. Can you imagine?
Don't.
Can you imagine him, or who are the other places where GMs are needed at the moment? Calgary. No, they have Craig Conroy. Vancouver.
It happened.
Oh god, man! That Vancouver's my favourite team to watch from the outside, because that organisation consistently implodes on itself, and it makes me laugh so hard. The fact that they signed JT Miller to that contract and then didn't trade him, and then did fuck all at the trade deadline, apart from trading Bo Horvat. But then they traded what they got for Bo Horvat for Philip Hronek. Huh?
What a like, man, that team is so dysfunctional.
It's so bad.
You don't need to worry about the forward group when you have all-star Tyler Myers on your back end.
Oh, that quote is. Did you see that quote, Kyle?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, let me read it to you. I have it bookmarked on Twitter. Do I? Oh wait, no, I don't have a bookmark on Twitter.
Yeah, do you
Never
want me
mind.
to try to find it for you?
No, I think it's in the chat somewhere. Basically, Patrick Alvin went on Sportsnet 650 or one of the Sportsnet radios
Yep.
in Vancouver, and it was just after the draft lottery, and he said it's a real shame that we couldn't get the number one pick in Bedard, but I'm pleased to say we have an all-star in Tyler Myers playing at the World Championship this spring.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy. That's a oh man. Anytime you can be like, it would have been nice to have the best prospect of the past 10 years, but at least we have like a 33-year-old Tyler Myers is yikes.
I feel like every single one of the quotes that come out of Vancouver is like, I know that we could have had this like really, really good deal, but we decided to trade for player X who's been in the AHL for the last 4 years, but we signed him to a $500 contract because we think he can do really well. It's that sort of level which I constantly expect, and then it happens, and then I laugh, and then I can go to me and Roche's friend Frankie and laugh at him very hard.
He's a
He is
Panthers fan now.
He is a
He's
Panthers
jumped
fan.
ship.
He's jumped ship. He went out. So me and Roche watched me and Roche and Frankie watched the game
Game
5
5.
versus the Panthers in the second round in person, and Frankie was just rooting for the Leafs to lose, um, and it made Roche like really really like properly
I'm
upset,
still mad at him.
which is really funny. So instead of backing off, Frankie went out and bought a Florida jersey.
Fanatics one
Oh,
too, so
man.
that's how you know. Okay, he didn't go for a nice one. He bought a shitty Fanatics one.
It's
That's
it,
unreal.
it was very very it is very very funny. I have sort of run out of topics to talk about. There hasn't really been a lot going on in the last like week or so to do with hockey, apart from the playoffs, because last week was when all the Leaf stuff happened.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It went from like everything happening to being like, oh, both series are up 3-0.
Yeah, I wish there was a bit more drama, but there's not.
Oh, I
Well, I
we'll
mean, we
get
can talk
quite a
about
bit in the
Jamie
next
Benn
couple
for a bit
weeks.
if you want.
Yeah.
Say that again,
Yeah.
Rush?
Talk about Jamie Benn.
Jamie. Did you see that the suspension was for 2 games, both playoffs and regular season? So if they get
Yeah.
eliminated,
Yeah.
I think it's tomorrow they play, then he gets suspended into next season.
Yeah,
Which
that's
um,
great.
how I think it was on the Dangle pod, our enemies is now being dubbed by Roche. That the argument they could have made was that because he got kicked out of the game in the first 2 minutes, he's technically served a first game suspension, and then he got another 2. Come on, man, it's not hard. I actually agree with the Department of Player Safety for once. This is the first episode in ever that I haven't slated the Department of Player Safety. But man,
Yeah, it's tough with player safety because it's like they'll make one quote unquote right decision and then they'll make another 15 wrong ones, and it's every time they make the right one, it's like, well, hopefully this is the new precedent, and then the next 3 months go by and it's terrible precedent again. So
yeah, they'll go and suspend Jason Spencer for 6 games.
I mean, anytime you can do that, you gotta.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As my favourite time of the year is when the Leafs step onto the ice and they all receive 15-game suspensions for being members of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, gotta love Joe Chaperos. Yeah.
I think it's the first time Ben's been suspended as well, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's
Didn't he get-
crazy.
Is this the first time he got suspended?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What the fuck, man?
It's not even the first time he's cross-checked somebody in like the face or neck.
He
I
did it
can't,
as
remember, I can't remember. It was I think it was someone this season or last year. He cross-checked them in the neck and ended their
Yeah,
season.
Dylan Larkin. Yeah.
Larkin,
Yeah.
yeah. And what he did to Matthews earlier on this year. Oh man.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, if they let you get away with it, you got to do it, right?
No, no. That's not the right. That's the wrong attitude you're promoting there, Mr. Cushman.
But like that's the attitude that they have. Like if they let you get away with it, you've got to do it. Like, yeah, I don't know. Player safety's stupid. So
I could talk for hours about the wrongs of the Department of Player Safety. I'm not going to because I'm pretty sure we did that in another episode. I do want to ask you. Let's make this the final question because we have been recording for an hour and a
Okay.
half now.
Can I ask a goofy one as well?
Ask a. Oh yeah, you want to ask your question? Okay, I'll ask my shit question first. Why do you keep replying to me on Twitter? There's no reason for you to. Is it just because you're a really kind guy, or do I have some sort of like whimsical personality that makes you want to respond to me?
Well, there's a couple ways I can go with that. I would say most of the people in my life would probably laugh when you say that I'm kind because I'm a 95% of the time a sarcastic asshole. Um, my so my birthday was yesterday, and I think the
Oh, happy
way
birthday,
that
man!
Happy birthday.
thank you. The way I was wished happy birthday by multiple people was asshole, loser, shithead, the like. So I really got the Rolodex there.
Yeah.
But what it actually is two things. I spend too much time on Twitter, and I like having conversations with people. And the second is that at one point I was that person replying to other people in the industry or things like that, and that was like 3 years ago, essentially.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to have the following that I do. I'm lucky to have the platform that I have, which, as small as it is in the grand scheme of things, I'm very appreciative to have this kind of small network of people that are interested in the same kind of niche hockey things that I am. And working my way through the 700 or whatever accounts that I've muted from dumb people, there's the handful of interesting ideas out there or different discussions to have. So it's nice to kind of still engage in the community like that, and sometimes it gives you new ideas. Sometimes it's just nice to have some of those conversations and stuff. So that's what I'd probably ultimately say it boils down to.
Well, I cannot thank you enough, man, because I really didn't expect anyone to respond to my really stupid comments on Twitter. So the fact that I got you is really good, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been fun. Yeah.
Roche has
Yeah.
one question for you. This is the worst question I've ever heard. Um, we asked it
What
to
a
our
way to
guest
tee
last
him
week.
up. Wow.
and,
Just throwing him under the bus.
it's a it's a really good question to discuss, but as a principal question, it sucks. So
I
go
just want to
ahead,
shout out
Roche.
Gus for the week
Wow.
he gave me that led to me thinking about this question. So if hockey players could use any utensil other than a stick, which one would you have them use?
Wow. That is quite the question.
Yeah.
Of all the ways you could have gone, I wouldn't have guessed that in a million years. Okay, are we talking like the basic stuff, or can we get a little bit like
You can go out
random
there if you
here?
want. You can get out there.
Well, like my thought is like for a utensil, what are you using it for? Are you using it to try and score goals? Or are you trying to like injure other people?
Just like play
Like, what are
hockey,
we-
you
yeah,
know?
that's what I'm saying. Like, there's a lot of ways that do you get this in addition to your stick, or is it
No, this
replacing
is
your
in
stick?
replacement
It's
of your
replacement of your
stick.
stick, and also
Okay.
it's the same size as your stick. It's super sized.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a good factor here. Um, I don't know. Maybe like a supersized spatula. I feel like if you could just like
Ooh, that's
set up at the doorstep of the net and just have anybody just like throw passes in your direction, you can just kind of like redirect a bunch of things into the net. So, um, maybe that's like the best route to go, something like that. Or you can just get something to like specifically injure people. I don't know.
A large knife.
See, that's
Yeah, exactly.
that's a really
Hockey
interesting
stick
one.
size knife.
Because I said last week, we should use like the best one to use would surely be a knife because it's the closest one to a hockey stick, and also you have the ability to flex it, so you can get a good shot off with it. That was my thinking.
So like, unironically, if you gave Alexander Kerfoot a supersized spatula and told him to sit at the side of the net, I'm fairly sure he would score more goals than he did this season.
Oh, 100%.
So like, I think we're onto something here.
This is interesting. What we need to do is every single time we get a guest on the podcast is ask them that question, and then eventually we'll have an entire roster. And then what we can do when we finally have enough crowdfunding is that we can set up a game with all of these
Oh,
utensils
man.
and get everyone
Now
to play
we're
using their
cooking.
chosen
Now
utensil.
we're cooking.
No, we'll be playing ice hockey with those utensils.
Hey,
as
there you
usual.
go.
Hey. And I think with that, if anyone wants to sponsor this utensil ice hockey game, feel free to reach out. Apart from that, thank you so much to our guest, Kyle Cushman. Feel free to shout yourself out.
You plug yourself.
Plug yourself. We get no viewers, but still plug yourself.
Yeah, so I write full time for the Score. If do you guys have the Score over in the UK and stuff? Is that like a
It's
international?
not really
brand?
it's an
Okay.
international thing, but it's not really advertised here. Like we can
Yeah,
read the
I
articles, but
wasn't
it's
sure
not.
about anything
Yeah.
like that, but yeah. So obviously, all of my hockey writing mainly goes there. I do a little bit of stuff on Substack as well for some of the more niche stuff, like the Marlies and prospect stuff I do on there. But hoping to do more and more prospect stuff on the Score. For example, this week I did a Memorial Cup preview looking at 12 different prospects that'll be playing over the next 10 days in Kamloops. One of those is Fraser Minton, the Leafs prospect as well, who's going to be playing in a few minutes here in the opening game for the Blazers. So should be a lot of fun hockey on display there. But yeah, that's my main gig, and that's most of the stuff that you can find. And if you don't have the app and still want to catch all my stuff, you can follow me at Kyle_Cush, CUSH. Kyle_Cush with a K is probably a very different person. And you can find all my stuff there.
Thank you very
Yeah, thank
much
you so
to
much.
Kyle Cushman for coming on the podcast. You're such a legend for coming on, man. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate the kind words. It was a lot of fun.
And thank you for listening to the Lewis and Rozh Hockey Podcast. I've been Lewis.
And I've been Roche.
And tune into the next episode where we'll have Kyle Dubas on to talk about the Leafs.